So first, we're going to talk about burnout. This is one that most people, if not everyone, will be familiar with more so. At least you've heard of it, even if you haven't really spent a lot of time thinking about it. Hopefully, you haven't spent a lot of time feeling it, but I think a lot of us have. And I talk about it first primarily because I think it's affecting so many people. Honestly, I believe we live in a kind of a burnout culture, and we are I think in many professions, maybe most, maybe all in their own ways, we tend to have susceptibility to being kind of motivated towards burnout, conditioned and encouraged in some ways to exhibit behaviors that lend themselves to burning us out. First and foremost, to define burnout, technical definition here is state of physical and or emotional exhaustion, generally involving a diminished feeling of accomplishment. The most simple way to describe burnout is a really chronic exhaustion. And now this is, I would say, more of a really mentally driven issue that manifests with a lot of physical symptoms. Burnout doesn't result from working hard. That's, I think, the biggest significant distinction that's really subtle but really important to make is when are we working hard and when are we burning out? Because those are two sides of a coin that can easily kind of become a slippery slope and shift from just working hard into burning out very easily without detection to a point where you don't really recognize until you're overwhelmed by burnout. So to get more into the definition here and then move forward from there into that piece of recognition, which is so important, burnout, yes, affects us physically, affects us emotionally, and it's important to be mindful as you're kind of taking in this information to think about yourself and think about those around you. Competition, like I said, is a big part of our culture. But comparison doesn't always need to be about competition. Sometimes I think that the real value in comparison is just a reference point. It's giving us a different lens and a different perspective to kind of check with ourselves and to have checks and balances with each other. It's not always easy to recognize when you're in it. When you're in the eye of the storm, you don't recognize sometimes that you're in a storm. It takes help from others. It takes communication. And so I think it is important to think about, all right, who comes to mind? When I think about kind of chronic exhaustion, physically, emotionally, mentally, noticing some of these signs and symptoms here. Has somebody, myself or somebody close to me, been a lot more pessimistic lately, a lot more critical, a lot more impatient than they normally are? This often is a sign of burnout because it's the result of just being kind of at the end of your rope. When you're burnt out, you don't have the capacity as much to be patient, to be considerate, to be receptive, to be thoughtful. You're often overstimulated, overworked, just spent, and you don't have a lot left to share or to take in. Feelings of fear and anxiety, especially about the work that you do, whether it's going to your job, whether it's, signing onto the computer and working from home. Often, I'm going to talk about this a lot, this topic, parenting. All of the issues I'm going to go into have roots in parenting sometimes. And at times it can be really difficult as a parent to recognize because you don't have the checks and balances around you, especially if you're a stay-at-home parent, which I've been. You're in it by yourself for long, long hours. You're focusing so much on others and on things that need to be done. It is very difficult to recognize what's going on or to recognize, hey, maybe I am burning out. And if you do have some recognition of it, it can be even more difficult to do anything about it. So often we get to a point where we are just feeling fear and anxiety before going into this situation or job or environment where we're burning ourselves out the most. And this is an area where it's important to really slow down, stop and check in with yourself sometimes and kind of have an honest communication, honest inner dialogue. Am I feeling fear specifically about what I'm about to do, specifically in regards to the job I'm about to do, regardless of what it is, whether it's being a parent, whether it's being a caregiver? I've worked with many people in caregiving professions. That's really been my specialty over the years. And we'll get into another issue right after this that has a lot to do with burnout and some of these other issues and why it can be so difficult and so intricate trying to stop and make changes. But it's important first and foremost here to really be honest with yourself, really check in and recognize these symptoms. Am I feeling fear or anxiety specifically about my job and specifically about the amount of energy it's going to take me to accomplish that job and how I'm going to feel at the end of the day? Speaking of which, exhibiting less energy, less productivity, if we're becoming less efficient, we're still getting the job done, but it feels like it's just a grind. If we're having more difficulty concentrating on the job itself or just in general, when you're really diminished in your energy levels, when you're spent, it's hard to concentrate. You don't have that physical or that mental energy available. If you're constantly operating with less in the tank, it's hard to concentrate. It's hard to get tasks completed, or you might notice they're just not completed to the level that you're used to completing them at. I think it's important here that I stop and say these signs and symptoms can be very common things that we experience, right? On a day-to-day basis, weekly, monthly, over time. Everybody's going to experience these different symptoms at different points in time. It's not each thing that tells you, oh, I'm burnt out, but it is important to start to pay attention to some of these symptoms and start to recognize, especially when they're kind of piling up. If all of these are resonating with you right now, right? And you're thinking specifically, I've been working my ass off at my job, or my job as a parent, my job out in the world. Even, I'll speak a little bit from experience here. A lot of when I was in my most severe state of burning out, a lot of what was contributing to this for me was being really focused on exercise. I got into a routine, and it was much more than a routine, but it was a very intense, kind of obsessive relationship with exercise. And I was extremely invested time and energy wise. Exercise is really spending energy. It's working your body, right? More than anything. I was going to the gym almost every single day, if not every single day, most weeks. And I was spending at least an hour there, sometimes more. And I was really intensely pushing myself in the exercises I was doing. I was even sometimes walking to and from the gym, which was a couple of miles from my house. I was trying to get my plus steps in per day. For me, it was a very severe situation. But I didn't really stop and recognize that at the time. It was a slow, gradual progression to get to that level of frequency and intensity that was really burning me out really severely and very thoroughly. And that's how this happens. It's like the idiom of boiling the frog. I don't literally like that expression, but the idea of slow boiling. The water gets hot over time, and so by the time you're boiling, right, by the time you're burning out in a literal sense, you don't really know right away. It's gradually happening to you and lulling you into this false security. It starts out in the beginning maybe as being comfortable, being secure, being a productive and effective and efficient activity that you're doing. But over time, when you are burning out, you go past that line, where the balance is, you go far past it to the extreme. This is all adding up to an extreme state of being. When you're burnt out, when you're burning yourself out, it is an extreme overdoing of what's probably a healthy or natural or normal job or behavior, So it's difficult sometimes not to get down on ourselves or to fight ourselves or kind of resist acknowledging that we are burning out, because often we're doing something that we care about, something that has value to ourselves and maybe to others, something that's important in our lives. And so, yeah, it's important to recognize these signs, right? And recognize this experience in yourself. But I do want to acknowledge it can be very difficult, which is why I'm sitting here talking about this. It can be very difficult to recognize and to admit and acknowledge, yeah, I'm burning out, because then you have to deal with it and you have to make changes, and you do. I'm going to go into that soon, but first I want to just kind of sit in the recognition of not only that there are challenges here, yeah, it's important to recognize these signs, right, and recognize this experience in yourself. But I do want to acknowledge it can be very difficult, which is why I'm sitting here talking about this. It can be very difficult to recognize and to admit and acknowledge, yeah, I'm burning out, because then you have to deal with it and you have to make changes, and you do. I'm going to go into that soon, but first I want to just kind of sit in the recognition of not only that there are challenges here, but that they're valid challenges, and that getting into a state of extreme situation, like being really burnt out, is not your fault. It's become your responsibility when you started to recognize when you're in that state. It is your responsibility it was my responsibility to take hold of my life, to take corrective actions. And for me, I know I wish in many ways that I did sooner than I did, because it got really, really, really bad for me. And at the same time, that's why I'm sitting here now, able to share with others and able to help others with the same situation, because it got so bad for me that I became viscerally aware of what was going on and really investigated and dove into learning really, really hard lessons and applying those lessons. And now that's what enables me to help others work through and out of these states, which definitely can be worked through and be worked out of, no matter how extreme. I am sitting here as proof of that. But the important first thing is to recognize. That's what this part is all about. Acknowledge and recognize what's going on, and accept that it is going on, so you can take actions that you need to take to change it.